Hey there. Welcome to another episode of No Bad Ideas, the podcast from the Revs Agency, a full-service marketing agency located right here in downtown Buffalo, New York. I am your host, Mitch Mursky, and I am very pleased to inform you that we have a guest on today's episode. Joining us today on No Bad Ideas is Nate Benson. Nate is the Director of Media and Public Relations for 43North, the $5 million startup competition based right here in Buffalo. Nate, if you wouldn't mind, just maybe give us a better idea of what 43North is all about and what you do for them.
Sure. First, thanks for having me on the podcast. So my role at 43North, as you said, I'm the Director of Media and Public Relations. So any content you see from 43North on social media, any videos, any podcasts, I create that. I'm kind of a one-man media shop, so to speak, of all things 43North related. I also work with the media hand in hand. I used to be a member of the media. I used to work at Channel 2 News here in Buffalo. So from a public relations side of things, I do all things PR, outreach to the media, outreach to national media outlets, local media outlets, and just spreading the message of 43North. As you mentioned, 43North is the $5 million startup competition based in Buffalo, New York. It's a competition similar to kind of like Shark Tank, so to speak. We have a big event every year at Shea's Performing Arts Center where we kind of bring in the applicants and the finalists of the competition and kind of do a Shark Tank style pitch off. And then those winners are incubated here in Buffalo for the next year, and then with the ultimate goal of those companies growing and flourishing here in Western New York, which we're seeing some pretty great returns on that. So it's a very interesting program, very unique program, one of the largest startup competitions in North America and the world. So it's right here in Buffalo, and proud to be part of it.
Excellent. You mentioned a bit about your podcasting experience, and that's something that I think we're definitely going to delve into here a bit more on this podcast. Maybe you could just talk a bit more about what podcast it is that you're operating for 43North.
Sure. So each week we publish an episode of Latitude, the 43North podcast. For those geography nerds out there, Latitude is obviously the 43North is where the name of the organization came from. So when we were brainstorming ideas of the podcast, we tried to make everything connect and correlate, and Latitude seemed to make the most sense. And we kind of look at it as the stories of Western New York moving forward and upward, and that's kind of where we came up with Latitude. Like I said, we publish an episode each and every week. We're about to cross into episode 60, so we've been at this just over a year. We started about a month into my tenure at 43North, so last April is when we officially started. And it's been a great journey. We've had 60 guests on, all different, types of folks, investors, other judges of the competition, winners, other entrepreneurs, media folk, PR professionals. We kind of have a wide mix of people who can tell stories for other startups, other entrepreneurs, and we're really just looking at an opportunity to share the story of Buffalo's emerging entrepreneurial ecosystem. A lot's changed in the 5 years or so that 43North has been around. There's a stat I always like to cite. About 6 years ago, there was about $6 or $7 million of venture capital coming through Buffalo in terms of startup money. Last year, it was over $125 million. So in just half a decade, leaps and bounds better in terms of the startup ecosystem in Western New York. And a lot of factors, not just 43North, play into that. Launch New York, Startup New York. There's a lot of organizations, a lot of people out there working to grow Buffalo as a hub of innovation and entrepreneurism. So 43North is just a small part of a greater picture. And we try to share those stories each and every week on the podcast.
Cool. Actually, thinking back to your experience with the local news station here, that's actually how I came to be aware of you, was the stories you were doing specifically about the emerging technology and the emerging companies that were happening right here in Buffalo. So I know that your podcasts there on the Latitude podcast are always very engaging, not only because of the subject matter, but also because you've got a background in media, so you make it very interesting for the consumer. So.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was kind of looking to find my niche as a TV reporter. I worked overnights. I worked the daybreak shift on Channel 2 News, and I was looking for something to stand out because if you work the overnight, the graveyard shift at a news station, you tend to cover homicides, car accidents, and fires. And there are a lot of times in a given week where I'm covering all of those in one day, some of them fatal, and it was just really kind of hit me pretty hard from a psychological standpoint. It's just so much heavy news, so much heavy material you're dealing with every day. And at the time I had a young child at home, and I wanted to go home happy. So I was kind of looking at opportunities in the region of stories to cover. Nobody was covering the tech and research scene coming out of UP. Nobody was covering the startup scene that was emerging with Launch New York and 43 North. And I said, okay, great, that's an opportunity. I'm a technocrat myself. I love technology. I love innovation. My first job in college was back of house manager at Apple, so I was kind of, in innovation, so to speak, with dealing with Apple and Apple customers all the time. So I was like, okay, this is a great opportunity, a great niche. And I did that for about 18 months, and then obviously became aware of 43 North and other organizations, and an opportunity presented itself to get involved directly. I didn't have any good startup ideas. I still don't. I've got a couple things I'm working around, but I figured these entrepreneurs need help telling their story. I'm a storyteller. I'd be thrilled to at least get in the mud a little bit with them and tell their story. And it's been great. It's been a great year of telling their stories via video, via podcast. And one of the things I'm actually disappointed about, though, is nobody else in the media outside of the Buffalo News or Business First has really picked up that slack and continued to regularly tell those stories. It's unfortunate because there's a lot that's, I think, kind of going under the radar in Western New York of great innovation coming out of the college and university system, and great innovation that's being attracted to Western New York via 43 North, and homegrown innovation via Launch New York. So it's a lot of stories that can be told, and we're working to tell as many as we can at 43 North. I kind of like to think of ourselves as certainly not a news organization, but kind of a megaphone, so to speak, for the ecosystem.
Right. Speaking of the homegrown piece of it, there's a new program you guys have launched as well, or launching at this point, right? What's that all about? What's the new program you guys are working on?
So we've been very fortunate at 43 North. A lot of people look at us for ideas. They look at us for kind of mentorship and just conversations. And each year at finals, we bring in judges from around the world to judge our competition and judge the companies that we're trying to attract to Buffalo. And one of those gentlemen was Dave Jakubowski from Facebook. He's a Western New York native, but is now the VP of Publishing at Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's one of the judges from last year, right?
One of the judges from last year, and he was blown away by the things that were happening during 43 North Week last year. That started conversations with Facebook, and we've had a long-standing relationship with M&T Bank. And about 2 weeks ago, we announced an initiative called Ignite Buffalo. It's designed specifically for small businesses and kind of smaller, scalable businesses in Western New York and the 8 counties of Western New York. So it's not like the startup competition that we do, the $5 million. This is a partnership with Facebook and M&T Bank, as well as Amazon AWS, WooCommerce, WordPress, QuickBooks, and other national partners. And it's kind of an offshoot rather of the Facebook Community Boost. Facebook Community Boost is a nationwide 3-day circuit of curriculum. So it's digital skills 101 for your business, and using social media for your business, and banking for your business. Facebook approached us. They wanted to do something similar to a 43 North. How do we do that? And I'll never forget, it was the Friday before the Bills playoff game in January. So I was ready to go for the weekend. I'm like, I cannot wait. It's going to be great. And I get a call from our chairman, and he says, I need you to come over. I got something for you. And I'm like, all right, the chairman just called me to his house. This is either really good or really bad. I'm not really sure here.
Right.
And long story short, myself and Colleen Heidinger, VP at 43 North, she and I have kind of, along with Bill Maggio, helped develop Ignite Buffalo, pitched it to Facebook and the other national partners, including M&T Bank, and everybody kind of got in line, fell in love with the idea, and we're offering 27 grants ranging between $25,000 and $100,000 to West New York small businesses. So, the whole idea is for those businesses to tell us their story, and what would they do with a grant, how to better their business. Would it mean them getting the opportunity to finally start advertising on social media? Is it hiring 2 more people to really grow your business? Is it, the down payment on a second location? Whatever their unique story is. And, in our eyes, we just want to grow entrepreneurship in Western New York across the board. For every one quote unquote startup job, 5 service jobs are created as well, and vice versa. And I think if entrepreneurship in general is booming in Western New York. Everybody's going to benefit, including the startups that 43 North is trying to attract.
Right. That's awesome. And that's actually launching as we speak, or what?
So it's live now. Small businesses who may be listening to this, who are curious about it, should head on over to ignitebuffalo.org. They have until June 13th at noon to apply, and it's a pretty straightforward application. It's not like a 5 questionnaire, but it takes about an hour or so to do it. It's a little bit in depth, and that's just kind of one of those things to make sure that people are serious about grant money.
Right. Okay. One of the bigger buzzwords in marketing these days is podcasts. Because I actually sat through a great presentation you gave a couple weeks back about how to podcast. I thought maybe we could talk a bit more about the process you recommend people follow and some of the best practices they follow when they're talking about maybe launching or considering launching a podcast. So maybe the first question I've got for you is podcasting for everyone, or is there a certain sort of filter you should put on it before you decide to jump in with both feet?
I never want to discourage anybody, because I think creating something is better than creating nothing. That being said, podcasting isn't for everybody. It's not for every industry. It's not for every small business. And I look at an example at 43 North. I met with some folks at the UB School of Management. They came to me with a similar question. We want to start a podcast. Can we chat your ear off? And I never turn down that conversation. You just never know where conversation's going to lead. And I always give people that half hour, 45 minutes to talk some stuff out. So I met with them, and at the end of it, they pitched that they wanted to do a once a month podcasts for about 10 or 12 episodes. And I said, well, you don't want to do a podcast then? And they looked at me and they're like, well, yeah, but do we really want to do it? I'm like, no, you don't. Podcasting is a volume game. It's really trying to win the audience over by consistency. It's winning that audience over by kind of volume, and by that I mean just, again, I guess consistency. Doing a once a month podcast, the expectation of the listener would be it's a very highly produced piece of content that you would maybe hear on like an NPR or This American Life, or insert other high-end podcasts. Your Serial is another one that you might be familiar with. That wasn't what they were going to do. I mean, they didn't have the infrastructure to do it. And I said, what you want to do is probably come onto our podcast. Let's partner together. Mm-hmm. You have access to people I want to talk to. Mm-hmm. And that's high-level executives in Western New York who if I begged and pleaded with, I probably could get on. Whereas UB School of Management, a lot of these people are alumni. They just need to pick up the phone. So it's a win-win for both of us. I want the high client, that high guest on my podcast. They've got the access to them, but they don't have the infrastructure for the podcast. So it was a perfect balance. We've released one episode. We have 4 or 5 more in the pipeline with UB School Management. I think it's a great partnership, and that's just one of those examples of that wasn't the best scenario for them. Mm-hmm. Another situation that I've witnessed is people who want to start a podcast, but they don't listen to a lot of podcasts. So they're like, oh, it's going to be this and this and this. It's like, well, hang on, time out, stop. Yeah. Listen to a lot of different podcasts. Spend a weekend looking, if you want to do a business podcast, what are the top 10 business podcasts or the top 10 pop culture ones? Yeah. If it's anything more than a few folks just sitting behind a microphone, you gotta think how engaging that'll be for the listener. Yeah. As we are 2 guys in a microphone right now. Right. So I'm trying to be as engaging as possible.
I think we're doing
And another situation is people who are experts at something aren't necessarily the best hosts of something. Mm-hmm. And as any marketing professional will know, like, you only have a limited amount of opportunities to win that person over. Right. And you have a limited number of opportunities to get them convinced to buy into something. And if you don't have someone who can keep with the conversation, keep with the flow of things, it's tough. And a lot of experts aren't great at just driving the conversation. Mm-hmm. They are great at long, drawn-out answers for 10 minutes. And I've had plenty of guests on my show, and I'm not going to throw anyone specifically under the bus.
That's okay. There's 60 of them. You can pick your
people could guess maybe, but there's been opportunity. There's been chances on our podcast, or instances rather, where I've asked a question, and 5 minutes later, I'm finally able to answer my follow-up question. Right. So people really need to consider what their role could be. Is it host? Is it expert? If it's expert, okay, find podcasts you can be an expert on. Right. There's a little bit of an oversaturation right now of podcasts in the market, and I'm not here to dispute whether that's good or bad. I know our audience is hyper local to Buffalo, and there's not a lot of Buffalo-based podcasts. There's a ton of business worldwide podcasts that are way more successful than ours. So I consider success, are we engaging with the local audience? And we are, and we're happy about that at 43 North.
Excellent. Yeah, actually, one of the podcasts that we produced for one of our clients is a very narrow, niche trademark law podcast.
Yeah.
But the listenership's never going to be as big as Serial, but you're really hitting the target between the eyes. Basically.
Well, and that's the thing. Like any piece of material a marketing professional would be producing, you have to set the expectation of what success looks like in that role. And I look back at the stats of the Latitude podcast. The first month of 4 episodes, we had 220 total downloads. Last month, we had across 4 episodes a total number of about 1,100 downloads. So if you look at the year-to-year growth of that, it's upward.
Yeah, right.
I'm happy with
That's
that.
good.
And it's still hyper-local to Buffalo, so that means we're growing the local audience in Buffalo. The second biggest market for us is actually Silicon Valley, and the third is Boston.
Okay.
So we're hitting the audiences I want to hit.
Yeah, right.
And we've been listened to in all 49 states. Idaho, I still haven't gotten my one listener in Idaho. So
Really? I have friends there. I can turn them on to that.
Perfect.
Great. So I guess now that if you've gone down the list, that yes, okay, I'm going to be consistent. Yes, I have a way to just develop an interview style that is entertaining, bring in guests, and have a content calendar. So let's say that you are ready to get started with a podcast. But what's sort of the minimal someone can get started with and still make it sound somewhat professional when they're putting a podcast out?
First thing, again, what is the show? What are you trying to do? Is it a conversation? Is it a story? Is it a narrative? Is it figuring out what it is? In the case of Latitude, it's a conversation. It's just like any kind of sit down interview you would have. You would see on like PBS or any other type of podcast. And why did we choose that? Well, my experience in being a reporter was having long form interview conversations with people. So I can at least, I know that in my wheelhouse, I can probably have a conversation with somebody for about 20 minutes and keep it relatively moving.
Right.
Anything more than that, especially in podcasts, the listener gets a little tired of it. The listeners move on and they don't complete the episode. So I want them to complete the episode. So we our format is 20 to 25 minutes with about 2 minutes on each end, intro and outro, to clean up some house cleaning items. Your reminder to apply to the 43 North competition, reminder to like us on iTunes and all that type of stuff. So you figure out the format. That's the biggest thing. So it's your intro, the guests, conversation, outro the show, whatever the case may be. Break that down. The second thing is think of 10 guests. Plot out who are my first, if it's conversation, sit down, what are my first 10 guests? Or if it's a narrative, This American Life type story or a Serial type story, generally it's going to be kind of like a documentary, so you need to kind of plot it out like, okay, what's the first episode story? Is it, I'll use Serial for example. It's setting up what happened and then everything that followed later. In our form, and this is something I didn't do when we launched Latitude. I didn't plot out the first 5 guests. So like week 3, I'm like, crap, I don't have a guest. I've got an incubator full of people, but I want to okay, what do I do here?
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah. So it's if I could go back to talk to me, I would be like, oh, great. Another thing you want to do, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but since I'm on the topic of it, when you launch about 5 episodes. Give people a little bit of sample of what you are so that they can buy into it. Gives them more than one listen.
That was actually really good advice when you had mentioned that before, and we'd already started the podcast, and I thought, oh yeah, that would have been a pretty good thing to do. Would be to have a bank of library basically of past shows.
Yeah, because the one thing I find, especially with the Latitude podcast, and I believe a lot of other podcasters, content creators, find a similar situation where people will binge listen. And I looked at the stats this morning from this past weekend, and we had a huge spike on Sunday, and I looked in and I was like, oh, the same person listened to about 5 episodes, and there was like 10 of those instances over the weekend. We had a pretty busy weekend, which I'm happy with. Which means, because I can gauge, the service we use gauges the IP address. So like, oh, this person listened to 4 episodes, 5 episodes. That's fantastic. So they're bought in. They're probably going to now subscribe and always consistently listen. So that's, again, when you're ready to launch, that's certainly one thing. But once you figure out your 10 guests, then you have to, again, book them, organize them, get them in the books, get them recorded. But before you do any of that, really find somebody who's interesting enough, but maybe not somebody you want on the show, and just record an episode. Whether it's a coworker, whether it's, just get familiar with that interview style. Get familiar with, whatever bad jokes you want to include in your show, or whatever little nuances of your intro or outro. Exactly.
Yeah.
I've got, the long-standing joke on Latitude is Nate's nacho stand-in. Every once in a while, our VP of marketing, Peter Burakowski's like, really, with the nacho stand again? I'm like, listen, the kids love it. What do you want from me? So
they're requesting it.
Yeah, I can't get rid of it now. They expect it. So
right.
It's just practice makes perfect, just like anything. Whether it's playing piano or woodworking or design or anything, you gotta practice to do it well. Your first episode's probably gonna suck. Mine did. I went back and listened to it not too long ago. I was like, oof, that was rough.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
You go back and listen to something like Nerdist, which is probably one of the more popular podcasts in the world. Go back and listen to one of those early episodes, and then listen to a current episode.
Yeah.
It's completely different.
Yeah.
The guests are finally honed in on what cylinders they're able to fire on, and it's a way better show than it was on 10 years ago. Now,
yeah.
That podcast has been going.
Yeah. So maybe just getting more into the technical aspects of podcasting, the equipment-wise, like what are you using for equipment, or what would you recommend people, if they're just getting started, what sort of equipment would you recommend?
Sure. The setup you guys have is a great setup. You're probably recording into GarageBand, which is available for free on every Mac. And you've got, I think, a Blue Yeti microphone here, which is a great, kind of $100-ish mic. It's great in a controlled environment, USB. You can kind of take it with you wherever you go and produce a pretty decent podcast. And again, looking at the format, if your podcast is just nothing but talking, okay, how do you polish that? Well, you add a little bit of royalty-free music. You add some other interstitials here and there. Like, just think of little production elements that can add some flair. It goes a long way. I've heard a lot of podcasts where it's just like people jump into a conversation and it's 20 minutes of just nothing but talking, and then they're out. I came previous to Channel 2 News. I was a producer and director at WBBZ, which is a local television station. And we produced half-hour TV on a weekly basis. So again, looking at your formatting, it's like an intro, outro, music, blah, blah, blah. Break it up in that regard. The best way to do that is listening to other podcasts or watching other content, and just figuring out your flow.
And then just maybe to finally kind of wrap it up with. How are you gauging sort of success, or what do you look at in terms of the factors of success?
It was funny when I got when we first started using Podbean. I was looking at the analytics and it said 6,000 hits. I'm like, holy cow, this is great. After like 3 episodes, and I'm like, wait a minute. So podcasts are distributed by an RSS feed. RSS continuously pings out to people. So when people, whether they go to 43North.podbean.org, even if they don't listen to something, it's going to ping that RSS feed.
Wow.
So I'm looking at the numbers. I'm like, I got a hit. I'm
it's time for a raise, boss.
Yeah. Actually, I was looking at the wrong analytics.
Oh.
So that's why that first month we actually only had 222 total downloads.
Okay.
People accessed it a number of like 6,000 times or whatever.
Okay.
So that first month, like I said, was 220 downloads, and now we're upwards north of 1,000 downloads a month. So again, that's successful to me. When I look at the geography breakdown of that, it's mostly Western New York. Okay, so I know I'm talking, to the people I want to talk to.
Okay.
It's the feedback I get. People. Part of it is being engaged, trying to be engaging with your audience. Who do you want to hear on the podcast? Putting the power a little bit in the listener's hands. Who do you want on the podcast? What do you want on the pod? Do you want a Q&A on the podcast? Do you want whatever the case may be. Whatever power you can kind of get in the hands of your listener, I think the more successful you can be, because democracy apparently always wins.
Yeah.
And you want to be engaging and set yourself up for success in that way.
And then just finally, maybe the discoverability of your podcast. Is it mostly just right now? Are you guys doing paid promotion at all to let people know it's out there, or what are you using to kind of get people to
a lot of organic social media. Daily, sometimes twice a day, post about it, morning and evening, whenever you find kind of your target audience. There's tons of services out there that can kind of gauge when the best times to post content out there. But it's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. LinkedIn, if you're looking for experts or looking to just engage with the audience, LinkedIn is a massively powerful tool that, me coming from TV news didn't understand really the power of LinkedIn until I got into the 43 North world. Everything's LinkedIn. Yeah. I'm like, I've been asleep at the wheel of this.
It's a whole other world out there.
It's a whole other world for me. But a lot of it is, I'd probably say, equally important is actually paying to advertise your podcast, and whether that's ads on Twitter and LinkedIn, Facebook. We do a lot of Facebook advertising with our podcast, and we constantly are A/B testing. We're constantly trying to figure out what the best use of our budget is for advertising the content, because we don't produce the content don't produce the podcast just to produce it. The purpose of the podcast is to share West New York's story of a growing ecosystem, but it's also part of our recruitment. It's part of a tool that we use to engage with potential applicants of the competition. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get startups here that would flourish here. So if they hear a podcast about advanced manufacturing and they're an advanced manufacturing startup, I could do business in Buffalo. Yeah. It's a third or an eighth of the cost of doing business in Silicon Valley or New York City. Right. I should probably check that out. Right around the corner from the incubator, they've got a world-class artificial intelligence supercomputer. Fantastic. Great. That's what that's the main mission. It's to sell it to the other startups that we're trying to attract and apply to the competition. The sub goal for this is just, again, to spread the message of who we're trying to contact with.
Got it. So the competition, 43 North competition, just wrapped the application process?
Depending on when you publish this, May 31st is when the application deadline for the $5 million application competition is due at midnight. So we'll be at the office until about 2 a.m. answering emails from the West Coast and abroad. Yeah. That's always a fun night. We normally do a live stream in the office, and it's a bit silly. Yep. So it's definitely fun. But it's a busy summer for us. I mean, there's no. It's funny, we always kind of in our off season, there's really no off season, because the second we get done with applications, we're planning the show at Shays. The second we're done at the show at Shays, we're then planning for another round of recruitment. And by the way, in between all this, we're helping the current class of winners get acclimated to Buffalo, fall in love with Buffalo, and grow their businesses in Buffalo. So, I don't know when I find time to record this podcast, but I do.
Yeah, that's important. It's important. Well, Nate, thank you very much for taking the time to be on No Bad Ideas.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I appreciate the invite. Can't wait to come back someday.
Yeah, love to have you back in the future as well.
Cool. Cheers.
Thank you. That'll do it for this episode of No Bad Ideas. Thanks so much for joining us. If you would, please go onto iTunes and give us a 5-star review. It really helps with people discovering the podcast. If it's something that you like, hopefully you'll share it with your friends. Take care.